Oof. Hello, everybody. Howdy do. We're going to crank down the music once again, down nice and low. Howdy. Welcome back to Scoop Universe, the Surreal Love Stories, episode number 8, I believe this is now. We are going to be talking about the second flashback episode that we have yet to see. We are going to go deeper, even deeper back in time to complete another kind of cycle of connections to a bunch of other different things that we've kind of been alluding to, seeing characters about, and even just in this very last episode, in the chess episode, we saw a character that is actually from this episode today. And today's episode is the A.S.M.R episode, or as the Pitch Bible kind of graciously refers to it as Harvest Season. This is kind of the other primary episode that I have kind of scripted out a lot of already, in a certain sense, not the full script. But when it comes to the actual Pitch Bible, this is going to be the episode that eventually I fully script out and make the quote-unquote pilot episode. So a thing we kind of talked about maybe a little bit before is that when you're pitching these shows, you kind of need to have a pilot episode or an initial episode that is done out. But as far as I understand it now, the best thing to do is really have an episode that should be indicative of or kind of representative of a normal episode in your show. The pilot that we had read on the very second episode of this series for us, so the very second YouTube video, was me literally reading word for word the script that had been written for the true episode 0, like the first time that we see Scoop, the first time that we see Trip, the first time we see Biscuit, the first time we see Pompola. And though that is the kind of very, very initial first episode that will probably be aired on TV, this is the episode today, the Harvest Season, the A.S.M.R episode, will be the one that I think is kind of the strongest showing for what Scoop is about in a lot of ways. Kind of a very connective episode. You could argue the chess episode right before this, the one we talked about last Tuesday. You could argue that the chess episode is kind of another good representative episode, but I think that this one is probably the one that I like the most in terms of representing the show, because it has a humongous range. It has a ton of stuff going into it, a lot of connective threads throughout the web of this show. And today we're actually going to do something very similar to like when I read the pilot before, and I'm going to read just kind of verbatim what I have on my Pitch Bible for y'all today. And we're just going to go in the progression of the episode, and then after the probably half an hour or so of that, we're going to go back and talk about a lot of the elements in the episode, a lot of the kind of structural details of the show, and just kind of dive a little bit deeper into some of the behind the scenes, etc. So, to briefly recap, yet again, like always, hi Caitlin, Sherry. To briefly recap, Scoop and Biscuit were last seen in the chess world. They got scooped up from the waters around Pompola's planet way back when they ran into Underquiero the Conquistador. The chess planet comes orbiting in, and Scoops literally carves up a huge chunk of the ocean alongside and carrying Biscuit, Scoop, and Underquiero in their ship. They kind of get washed away and find themselves in the underbelly of the chess world that has a bunch of these falling waterfalls where Scoop and Scoop and Biscuit make their way through, find a species of people that have essentially set up camp within and set up a life and a community in this kind of underworld. It's a peaceful people. They have some more communications and conversations with them, learn some more. Scoop gets to map out, again, even more of another planet that he kind of hasn't been to before. And they finally break their way out onto the top of the chess planet that actually has the hedge maze layered on top of it. The episode after that, which was just the last episode that we talked about, has Trip. Oh my God. I'm gonna stop doing that at some point. Has Scoop and Biscuit progress through this maze. And so there is just a PvP, a hedge maze. It's essentially a tournament circuit that runs on this orbital sequence, much like the planet, and people from all over Scoop Universe, from every corner of Scoop Universe, essentially come to this hedge maze when the tournament resets, and they try to make their way to the center, where at the center there is supposedly essentially a treasure that allows you to dictate where the scooped water from that ocean gets to get dropped off and deposited. So it literally shapes ecosystems and communities and worlds around Scoop Universe. It's an incredibly high stakes tournament that these players fight for. Scoop and Biscuit begin to progress through this maze, and it slowly reveals itself into essentially a macro conversation for PvP and evolution and competition on the whole. We see the runners in the race and what it means to kind of be a predator and prey, and for someone to have an understanding that they are predator and that someone before them is prey, or that someone is prey and that they understand that something is above them or predator, and to misjudge that can be the difference between life and death. But then as they continue to go through the maze and this rat race is kind of developed, they see that there are people who have kind of begun to next level the concept of competition. And they realize that though I am stuck within the rat race, I am not obligated to run the race. I can find my own way. I can carve out my own niche. And we see these vendors and shopkeepers essentially set up a whole new way of living that instead actually symbiotically feeds, commensalistically feeds off of the runners in the race who are competing, who are there, who are tryharding. The sharks in the water, you can learn to essentially be the lamprey, or you can evolve to be the lamprey on the sides of those sharks and just survive just as well. They continue to go even deeper, and these next levels of kind of what it means to be alive in a competitive setting continue to get fleshed out. They ran into a character who is on their own quest from the Ising clan that we will see in a later episode, that they are instead running through the maze, not for the treasure, but for something else, for another type of access, for a breaking through or passage through this maze that shortcuts them to their real goal. Scoop and Biscuit eventually find themselves in the clutches of a nighttime prowling sphinx that speaks in these riddles read from the stars, and this kind of slinking cat attempts to steal literal letters and words and language from Scoop and Biscuit, but they manage to complete and solve the riddle and escape unharmed. So they think, only to find themselves even more lost as they escape this trap, and they begin to bleed into another kind of extremely urban setting all of a sudden out of nowhere that is a stark separation from everything else that we've seen in Scoop Universe so far. That was what we had talked about last episode. Today, because as we talked about long ago, the episodes go in these kind of little triplicate series. It goes a current chronology episode, a following episode, and then a flashback. Current, flashback. Today, the A.S.M.R episode is going to be a flashback. So Scoop and Biscuit are not lost in this new urban setting. We are time traveling back to even before the last flashback episode. And that's how these flashback episodes progress, is that as the show gets deeper and deeper in, the flashback episodes go deeper and deeper into the past to reveal more and more about the show. So today, I'm going to read for us what I have in our pitch Bible. This is harvest season. I'm just going to essentially read what we've got, start to finish, and then we're going to come back and talk about all the little details that are kind of going on. So, without further ado, this is harvest season, featuring the likes of Lily Gilder, Wauxa Cottonmouth, Hornay, and Dandalus. Scoop and Biscuit are summoned to a planet where, populated by a collective of quiet, fairy, cat-like cloud collectors, the locals have been reporting a type of disease or infestation upon their crop. Some clouds have been found after nighttime passes, with chunks and holes in them, damaged, rotten, or emptied and hollow. The people on this planet are essentially A.S.M. artists. They speak in soft, cooing tones and whispers, for the clouds are scared away by sound. They've learned to talk solely in these various A.S.M.R languages in order to keep the clouds within range to harvest. The clouds themselves are multicolored and perfectly fluffy, ideally like the artificial selection that we see of real crops. In partial reference to a series of things. Pretty Patties from SpongeBob. You can squeeze in a bunch of vaping references, allusions, memes, and jokes. Cotton candy, the nectar of the gods, and the Man Ray painting La Fortuna. Scoop and Biscuit walk into this planet and they kind of crest a hill, and before them they see, and I urge you to kind of go and Google La Fortuna or La Fortune by the surrealist artist Man Ray, and we're going to come back and talk about this again in a little bit. But Scoop and Biscuit come over this hill and see before them essentially the allusion to that exact painting. It is going to look almost identical, though copyright kind of juked and colors changed and elusively swapped. A vast landscape with these huge, colorful, bright and vibrant clouds. It turns out that there is a species of people, a cat-like species of people like the Sphinx that we saw in the chess episode, essentially a farming community of these cat people who have escaped their own predatory natures and set up a vegetative style of living. The clouds of different colors have different flavors and textures, including the white basic material of the solidified, mineable one that builds the OCCB, and we'll come back and talk about that later. But the cat people soar on gliding kites and walk upon the ground to harvest. These cat people only subsist on drink, for much like one of the ultimate foods of the gods, the bounties of these floating cloud pseudo-organisms, pseudo-plants, alone are enough to survive. Though predatory by nature, by their cat-like toothed nature, these people have abstained from that form of consumption, that kind of violent blood-drawing consumption, having since found a way to do it by simply farming these floating water, liquid, flavor, nectar farms. A quote that is kind of stuck into this little section here. Have you ever seen a loud and foggy day? The clouds hesitate and separate from violence, sounds, and chaos. At night, we would have to be even quieter. You always sound so much louder at night. So when combined with how difficult it is to see at night, for our people, we sleep the darkness away and let the clouds keep some peace. The clouds go dark and heavy with rain when they grow old, and they will shrink and fall like leaves and seeds in a forest, continuing the cycle of life in much the same way. All things must come down when they grow old. Scoop and Biscuit essentially come in to find these little tribal villages of these A.S.M.R cat people, and literally every cat character, and the goal and the real connective, like hyper connective purpose that I would love to see in this episode is getting actual like YouTube kind of semi-famous ASMR artists to voice these characters. I think the over connection, or the kind of the reach and the just the awareness of this community and of ASMR as a medium in general has a lot to go. But in a good way, in terms of a lot of exposition to still be had, a kind of lot of use to still be had. And I think in these types of cartoon shows, these Netflixy style shows, we're sleeping on the fact that ASMR can be kind of utilized in this way. But again, we'll come back to that and we'll talk about that. So to continue with the show, Scoop and Biscuit begin to kind of mingle amongst these cat people during the day, and they kind of learn the history of the planet. They learn some details about these clouds. Scoop and Biscuit walk alongside these little cat ASMR artists, and they have to even change their own voice. And they walk beside a patch of clouds that have begun to, again, kind of sink lower and lower to the ground, where they can begin to be harvested, or the cat people take their kites and fly up to the other colorful clouds. They're walking by the clouds, and someone accidentally makes a really sharp and kind of loud noise, almost as if like a scratching of the microphone on an ASMR video. And so they catch themselves, and the clouds kind of pull back in relation to the sound. But it turns out that some of the clouds actually kind of don't pull back all the way and seem to not react at all. And upon seeing this phenomenon, the A.S.M. artist cats kind of pull Scoop and Biscuit closer and reveal to them the secondary species of this world, the cloud ants. It turns out that there is a species of smaller, unrelated fairy people who truly do not speak at all. And in fact, they are so perfectly quiet that it actually allows them to symbiotically exist and live within the clouds themselves. They are called cloud ants, or cloud ants just with one word. And they build burrows and nests of quite beautiful construction within certain flavors of clouds. There are kind of subspecies between the different cloud ants themselves, but it seems that they have this niche relationship with being able to feed on at a very connected primal level, living inside the clouds themselves. The populated ones, the ones full of these cloud ants, are the ones that the A.S.M.R cats have learned that they are beginning to be kind of caught and infected with this blight, this kind of disease and a seeming infestation, the one that Scoop and Biscuit are called upon to kind of solve the mystery of. Sliding down real quick, there is a kind of, before they move on to the real mystery of the episode, I want there to be this kind of very kind of dreamy sequence where Scoop and Biscuit kind of just speaks to Scoop, and they've just been running all over the place. This leaves their chess episode again, though this is in the past for them. For the audience, we have just immediately come from a kind of high stress sprinting through a maze, and so Biscuit just says to Scoop, you just don't always got to be talking, man. And in just a vibey kind of way, this surrealist, just kind of walking scene, this kind of exploration, this kind of dreamy sunset pastel series of almost like a montage in a way, kind of similar to the action montage that we saw in the very first pilot. Another kind of montagey movement sequence where we get to explore some of the vistas and visuals of this little floating A.S.M.R planet with these bright colored clouds. They finish their kind of walk and they move on to kind of understanding and trying to figure out what is wrong with these clouds. The cat people go to sleep at night, and Biscuit and Scoop have the bright idea that it seems as if we should investigate, because all of the cats go to sleep at night. They say this on purpose, that again, everything seems louder at night. When you're walking in your hallway at night, when you go up to get water, you're so hyper aware of the fact that you're making more sound, or that you seem as if you are louder at night. And so almost on an evolutionary level, they avoid the nighttime. They sleep at night. The normalcy of their days is filled with farming these clouds and understanding them, but then they let the clouds take a break at night, literally as if they are a flock of sheep that they are tending to. Obviously, this is the first thing that kind of Scoop and Biscuit think about, is like, okay, well, if something is going wrong, you guys are all asleep at night. The watch is down at night, and this could be a perfect place to investigate just exactly what's going on. So Scoop and Biscuit wait until nighttime, and they essentially stake out some of these clouds that are filled with these little fairy cloud ant characters in them that seem to be working kind of around the clock. It turns out that there is a group of vile cat people. The Night Sphinx, arguably one of these characters exactly, maybe just kind of seen as a side character in this band of people to just even next level the power relationship that we had seen of the very powerful Night Sphinx from the chess episode. But it turns out that there's kind of a little cult of sorts within these cat people who are going to be voiced by male A.S.M. artists almost exclusively, that are discovered to be the perpetrators of this plague. At night, they break away from the sleeping tribal villages and under cover of darkness break into the sunken clouds as they sink down at night and are filled with cloud ants, and a new kind of level of ecosystem develops overnight. These cat people break into some of the cloud ant filled juice factories of sorts and begin to devour the fairy cloud ants. And there's kind of this very kind of like shadowy, dark, almost violent scene where Scoop and Biscuit watch the actual just sudden twist 180 of like aggressive, meat-eating, bloody, like carapace crunching A.S.M.R that erupts from this very villainous excursion into nighttime. And this is only made possible by the trust of the people, that literally they abuse the fact that the cat folk, it's almost like a way of life. It's like a law for them that they do not work at night. They vibe at night. They just sleep. They let the clouds chill. And because of this promise, because of this acceptance, a section of these cat people have essentially said, this is the perfect time, therefore, to punish you, to prey on this, to take advantage of this, and to eke out more of an advantage for myself. This is an extension, essentially, of the chess episode, where, again, we just saw these understandings of kind of what it means to make a villain villainous. And in many cases, it is the abuse of consent. And these predatory cat people are abusing their own people. We saw the Night Sphinx take advantage of the racers, and that's kind of a very, in a way, it's a sort of less villainous prospect, right? Like that Night Sphinx that was prowling his own kind of little mirage trap in the chess episode was almost given a weird pass, this weird competitive pass, because he was taking advantage of those that were competing, that showed up and said, I willingly accept the dangers within this maze. We see an even more villainous layer to this when this cat person, these kind of evil cat folk, take advantage of their own people. There is no even consent among racers here. There is no consent between the Cloud Ants, that they, not only do they just have the opportunity to steal words and language from them, but in this case, they actually eat them. They devour them. They steal life. It is the super villainous extension of what was already a relatively villainous Night Sphinx cat from the chess episode. Again, these cat people also speak in an A.S.M.R voice despite despising it, because they want to essentially break away from this new life. And this is again a kind of perfect opportunity to explore the idea of, in a weirdly like political way, right? This idea of keeping your composure, or kind of keeping up a mask of looking like everyone else, despite your kind of ideals and your like ideologies conflicting with everyone around you. It is literally, I mean, in so many words, it is the kind of the undercover MAGA character who is surrounded by people of a different political stance than them. I mean, it's the having to stay quiet because you know that it would almost out you, and the tension and anxiety, and if anything, the kind of the doubling down, the reinforcing of your ideals as you are forced to kind of keep them down because you know that the people around you might react negatively to it. And so you get to do some kind of weird, kind of twisty stuff there in terms of a bizarre American political perspective. But these cats, these kind of evil cat people, they reject internally everything that the rest of their society has kind of come to stand for. That quiet voice is not them. The lack of meat is not them. The lack of nocturnal behavior is not them. This is almost like this desperate want to reclaim the past, which again is often rooted in these types of political divisions like this. They seek to return to animalcy. They want to become and commit to the very kind of carnivorous lifestyle that their very now kind of vegetarian, vegan society is beginning to slowly or quickly reject. A quote from one of these villainous cat types that gets interacted with by Scoop and Biscuit, that essentially they catch them in the act. And their defense is to Scoop, do you know what it's like to only drink? And we can make a connection to Undercaro in this sense too, that this kind of conversation around liquid and the rejection of it, or the hyper acceptance of it. No substance, no fight, no thrill. We were born to hunt and devour. It is in our blood, in their blood, and this kind of licking and smacking of their lips, in eyes closed remembrance of the potentially of just the violence and the consumption that had occurred not minutes ago. Literally in their mouth is probably still the blood and flavor of these cloud ants that they just started to go to town on inside these clouds that are close to the ground. More satisfying than all of the colors of all the clouds in the world is this substance, this flesh. I would do it again with a flash of his eyes. I'll never regret being the animal that I was meant to be. And so we see this very, again, kind of like under Quiero's defense of themselves, the defense of the kind of the conquistador lifestyle. Under Quiero is arguing for, again, sure, I'm doing something villainous. I am interacting with the universe in a way that does begin to, again, defy consent in this kind of way. That their movement and capture of objects and capture of space throughout the universe had a villainous tinge to it. But yet he defended himself in this kind of simultaneously very narrow-minded, but also kind of very introspective way of saying, I know my identity, or at least the identity that I want to have, the identity that I connect with. Sure, it might seem villainous, but like, this is my right. This is this puffing of their chest and this flexing of what they believe to be a kind of God-given, evolution-given right to them of carnivory, of predatoriness. Just like under Quiero kind of defends his predatory nature of space, of movement, of saying, Scoop, you will not stop me. I mean, we are going to move. We were born with legs. We were born with the ability to craft these ships and sail the high seas. Like, stop me if you dare, because movement, in my mind, is this right that no matter how villainous, and that's when, again, these villainous characters, when they overstep the boundaries of their identity in this way, in terms of what it allows them to do or interact with other people, that's when you get an identity kind of gone wrong, in a sense, or kind of a misunderstanding of the identity. And these cat people, we see a different form of this defense where they fight for their right to use their teeth. This is kind of much more of a biological defense and being more cat-like. I mean, they are an animal species on purpose. We have a very different type of like imperialistic, white-centric defense from under Quiero, and a kind of much more human defense. It's much more on the levels of dominance over a world, where this animal defense here from the kind of villainous cat A.S.M.R folk is a defense of their almost like ancestry, of their origin, of their literal kind of like biology. Again, Scoop Universe is so early and so new that the evolutions within the peoples and within the species, though distinctly separated and separated by time as well, it's still so early and new that we're not seeing the kind of actual tangible results of change over time. These cat people still have teeth. They still have claws. They still have, in a certain sense, this bloodlust that is being moved away from by the kind of more conscientious characters of their society. But there is this cult, there is this group, there is this contingent within this species that says, like, no, like, there is something inside me and I must accept it. I feel the urge, the desire, the need to accept it. And in this case, that means fulfilling violence. And that does necessarily make them villainous. And this conversation of, again, what makes things villainous is upheld throughout almost every episode in Scoop Universe, because there is, on every single episode, there is a villain of sorts. The Waterhalls episode is really the only one that didn't have one, and maybe we'll have to go in and put one, but that was kind of more of a transition episode. So we just see a lot of interesting connections between the defense of villainy in a way that makes, like, the best villains obviously are kind of the ones where you can see why they think that they are right, or why a life in one environment, or a life under one perspective or one perception that doesn't get broken, or that doesn't get next leveled or communicated with or resolved, manifests itself in violence. And these villainous catfolk do just that. They abuse their own kind of people's agreements. They abuse their own kind of laws and codes of what it is, what's accepted to be okay, and as well as just straight up ignoring blatantly the lives and livelihoods of these cloud ant fairies that are kind of densely populating these farmed clouds. So Scoop and Biscuit will probably either chase or battle down or kind of debate or fight these cat folk, and it turns out that the main character's name at the moment, it's kind of semi-place held as Dandalus, Dandalus, the connection to Tantalus, of course, that we'll see in a second. And that connection is that Scoop and Biscuit essentially bring them to justice. They capture them red-handed there is no denying it. And Scoop and Biscuit probably have to have some kind of proof way, and maybe just Biscuit ends up bringing or waking up some of the peoples below, or the peoples asleep, as they bring the bad guys to court, in a sense. And Scoop's decree is that Dandalus must be bound in a cloud ant built cage, almost as if buried in the sand to be forced to have the ants crawl over your face. Scoop decrees that their kind of jail time is to literally take Dandalus and his crew and implant them as if the cloud ants themselves into these clouds, where they are forced to purely consume. They will still live. They will not die. They will not perish, as long as they still just drink the clouds themselves, essentially live the way that they should be living, almost in a weird way. And this decree comes as like a weird sort of twisted, almost like to enjoy to justice. And the cloud ants themselves kind of blow a tube-like funnel, almost like a straw, these little cloud ant fairies. It's like a little combo between, again, like this like bisected insect and a fairy that, again, are completely silent. They blow out of their butts this little tube of almost like spider woven silk that solidifies, and they stick it into Dandalus's mouth in this weird kind of gross kind of jokey scene of sorts. And the tube and funnel allows them to drink the very respectable, again, what every other A.S.M.R cat is drinking and living off of. It is a livable thing. It has resources. It has nutrients. They essentially force feed them this vegan or vegetarian lifestyle of sorts, forcing him to be fed forever, like a reverse Tantalus. So this is that kind of twist of the Dandalus Tantalus, where Tantalus is kind of forced to be with food above him that he can never reach and a drink below him that he can never touch. The punishment for Dandalus here is, instead of to fit his crimes, he is forced to be fed only a kind of a healthy thing, or to be fed to be forced into the ecosystem and this life cycle of sorts, in this just kind of inversion of another kind of Greek connection and Greek myth. But they are necessarily denied that substance, that blood, that crunch, and that life that they have been forcibly taking and stealing and destroying these populations of cloud ants. And it turns out that that is why, again, these clouds have begun to suffer, and the rot and infestation is a result of almost like the manifested blood loss and violence that is being inflicted upon these clouds. And that's why they can tell that something clearly is not right. Something is kind of being taken advantage of. As Scoop is talking to Dandalus while he's cast away in his cloud ant cell, Scoop berates Dandalus for killing something that begged for its life. There is a moment within Dandalus, we kind of see this flash inside Dandalus's eyes, and he almost doesn't, like, Scoop's voice just kind of like glazes over, and he almost doesn't hear anything else that Scoop says. He just kind of like buzzes down. And Dandalus realizes that in a flash of understanding, this could and perhaps will be the downfall of Scoop one day. A villain that knows how to act purely good, and he delivers a prophecy to Scoop. Watch your back, Scoop, he says. One day that trust will be the end of you. The camera switches over to Biscuit, where one of the kind of little details about Biscuit that we haven't really messed around with too much is that it turns out that he has this kind of a little mini artifact of sorts. Like, he normally wears sunglasses, but he has an extra pair of literally magically crafted sunglasses called sin glasses that are, when put upon him, when put over his eyes, it allows him to see, and it's kind of on a long cooldown, so we can't use it very often. But upon hearing this prophecy, Biscuit gets like very anxious and flicks on his sin glasses vision, and it sees, and when he flips over to it, he sees the screen changes to this super vision that Biscuit is essentially peering through, And it shows this kind of like bright red and black villainy within Daedalus as he's kind of floating suspended in this cloud. And we see Biscuit looking at him and shows that he, again, is indeed, as they expected, more evil than good. Biscuit attempts to kind of assure Scoop, because Scoop almost gets rattled in a weird way. This prophecy, I mean, no one has done anything like this, and it seemed as if Daedalus almost separates from reality for a second and has this like flashback or flash forward of his own. And this kind of doesn't settle very right with Scoop either. And so Biscuit kind of tries to settle him down. He just says, "We did the right thing, Scoop." After seeing through his sunglasses, assuring him as they leave, "We did the right thing." You can take this, obviously, with a grain of salt and under an understanding or misunderstanding, but this essentially ends the Scoop Biscuit flashback episode within this A.S.M.R ep. Trip is seen to kind of bring us back to the beginning, where we'll then start talking about explaining to some of the little works and details of this. The cold open of this episode, because we kind of talked about it again a little while ago, where I would love it if every episode essentially opens with a cold open and just a section devoted to just Trip himself. And maybe this cold open comes at the end of the episode, but probably not. Still probably comes at the beginning, a cold closing perhaps, where it shows Trip working in his castle lab again. And he's actually, it turns out that he is collecting and wants to be collecting this cloud material. Like, it is just an extremely bizarre material to him. And we see him working and kind of shifting with all these bubbling and glowing glasses and kind of chemical experiments in the works. It turns out that he has been working for a little while with just the normal white clouds from the A.S.M.R world. He has found a way in a process to take the white clouds and condense them down into bricks, and almost literally kind of make an entirely new resource out of it that can make solidified, tangible, solid objects that have still this maintenance of a weird design and flavor and density that just has some very funky properties to it. And it turns out that it has appeal and that he can market it and sell it. And this almost goes into showing, again, the necessary connection between like science that generates a profit in order for you in order to give you the luxury to be able to keep going and run your own experiments. Scoop or Biscuit, third time's a charm, Trip is just shown kind of working and manipulating and finding tweaks and victories and eurekas, among other things, within this cloud transmutation. And it turns out that he then takes these cloud bricks and sells them to the Olympus Cloud Castle Bank. And we see this in an upcoming series of episodes. It is going to be not 2 from now, but like 4 or 5 from now. This flashback episode that shows why and how Trip is going to have a connection with an upcoming episode, which is this bank that we saw the conquistadors kind of talking about and alluding to a little bit, where that's kind of where the marketplace for their intangible or fleeting or ephemeral artifacts is found, in this kind of very Herculean, Aegean, Greek, like the maximum of the Greek setting we're going to be seeing in this Olympus bank. Trip, it turns out, is partially responsible for some of the construction of some of the wings or areas in this Cloud Castle bank. And that's just kind of his connection to the A.S.M.R episode, as we then kind of leave his cold open, watching his scientific progress a little bit and his passage. And it cuts over to Scoop and Biscuit, who make their way over into these colorful clouds. And we see the next level of it, and that's when they explore the episode.